Good morning. I want to talk to you this morning about one of my favorite characters in the Bible. Her name is Hagar. And I'm going to link to the entire story about Hagar in the notes that go along with this email. But I want to just talk to you a minute about her and about why this story is speaking so deeply to me today. Abraham and Sarah, as you know and remember, were old when God came to them, and God told them he would make them the parents of many nations, and it was just so unlikely, and they were so old. And at one point, after years after God had made this promise to Abraham, Sarah gave her slave girl, Hagar, to Abraham. This was a really awful cultural custom at the time that was all about the sort of patriarch of a family having as many heirs as he could. And so if a wife could not have children of her own or could not have them anymore, she could give her servant girl to her husband, and any children born of that union would actually belong or be considered to be the children of the wife. And so Sarah gave her servant girl Hagar to Abraham, and lo and behold, Hagar got pregnant. And when Sarah found out and Hagar found out that she was pregnant, things didn't go well for Hagar. In part, I'm sure, because Hagar not only had been essentially raped by Abraham, but because now she also knows that her baby is going to be taken from her and raised by Sarah. And so Sarah is also really unhappy about this, and Sarah and Abraham send Hagar pregnant out into the desert. And God finds her, and God tells her not to be afraid, and that she will become the mother of many nations, and that he will make her son Ishmael great. And Ishmael is the word for God hears. And so God sends Hagar back to Abraham and Sarah to live under their protection for the safety and well-being of hers and Abraham's son, Ishmael. This morning's story finds us years and years in the future, when Sarah has now had her son, Isaac. And Isaac has now reached the age of weaning, which is about 3. And there's a big celebration because now they know that Isaac will live. And when Sarah sees Ishmael playing with her son Isaac, she realizes that she does not want Ishmael to be considered to be an heir along with her own son. And so she tells Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away. Now, there's a lot I could say even about that. I could pause here and talk about how wonderful it would have been if Sarah could have found what she and Hagar had in common, if she could have seen it in her heart to share Abraham or to share the inheritance that her son would inherit with Ishmael. I could imagine what it would be like as a model for even today's blended families, where there are children from different parents and children of different ages, and all the complicated human emotions that brings, and how a more generous, compassionate, loving response from Sarah might have changed everything. But I do want to focus on what happened next, because in fact Sarah and Abraham did drive them out into the desert, and the story tells us that once the water ran out, Hagar put Ishmael off a distance from her because she didn't want to see him die. And I should tell you that based on the timeline in the text, Ishmael is about 16 years old by now. So it's not that she literally carried him there, but they were probably already really weak with dehydration and hunger. And as a mother, she just couldn't bear to see him die. And so she also goes off by herself and prepares to die. And then I want to read to you what happens. As she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is." Because remember, Ishmael means God hears. "Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. There's something really beautiful about this, that it helps if you know something about sort of themes in the Hebrew Bible. And one is when the Bible says that it specifically instructs somebody to use their hand. The hand is a sign of power. And when somebody says that by their own hand they did something, that is a theme, a motif in the Hebrew Bible of power. And so in this moment, not only is God hearing the cries of the most vulnerable person, Ishmael, which means God hears, but God is giving Hagar the power. He's giving her not only eyes to see the well that will literally save their lives, but he is saying, take Ishmael by your own hand, by your own power. You will build a family. You will build a great nation. And when the story tells us that she found a wife for him, that's also a clue. That's something a patriarch normally did. That's a power normally reserved for a man, for a powerful man. This story tells us that God gives Hagar more than she ever could have imagined. That not only are she and her son going to live, but that she will have power and respect, that she will be able to build a future for him. And then let me let you in on a little secret about what Ishmael's future is. Ishmael becomes the father of Islam. It is through Abraham and his oldest son Ishmael that the three of the world's great religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are linked as this complicated family. Ishmael becomes the father of Islam, and Hagar, his mother, is the matriarch of this great family. So what does this story make me think about today? Have you ever been in a place that felt hopeless? Have you ever literally hungered or thirsted for something? Have you ever been afraid that you would have to watch someone you love die? Part of what this story tells us is the great good news that God hears. God hears the cries of the vulnerable. God hears even in the farthest reach of the wilderness, where there is, or at least appears to be, no living water, no hope, nothing to sustain you. God hears. And not only that, when you are powerless, when the family or the culture or the life you live has told you you have nothing of worth, that you are not powerless, that you have nothing left to give, God will give you what you need. God gave Hagar eyes to see living water that literally saved their lives. And God gave her the power to participate in this great story of God's. So, the story of Hagar is the story of a brave and wonderful woman, one of the first people that God speaks to directly, one of the only people that actually gets to give a name for God. Someone who literally had to sacrifice her own well-being for her son, that she was faithful to God and that God would fulfill God's promises even when it came at great cost to her emotionally and physically. Hagar is a marvelous, marvelous role model in the Bible and someone we hear too little about. So I encourage you to read the entire story of Hagar and to know that God hears, and God will give you what you need, even when it feels hopeless.